The most important boat of the Second World War was made of plywood. Its sides could not stop a rifle bullet. It was designed by a hard-drinking Louisiana boat builder for oil drillers and whiskey runners, not for soldiers, and the man who built it never spent a day in uniform. When the war was over, the Supreme Allied Commander of the invasion of Europe told a biographer who he thought had won it. He did not name a general. The boat began in the mud. In 1926, out of a small yard in New Orleans, Andrew Jackson Higgins built a shallow little craft he called the Eureka, meant for men who needed to run a motor through 18 inches of swamp water without tearing the propeller off on a sunken log. He recessed the screw into a half-tunnel in the hull so debris would pass under it instead of through it. He shaped the front into what he called a spoonbill bow, curved up and forward, so the boat could drive straight onto a riverbank, sit there while a man loaded it, and back off into the current without help. It could turn almost in its own length. Nothing else in the Gulf came close. Higgins had drifted south from Nebraska, where he was born in 1886 and thrown out of school as a boy. A profile in life later tried to sum up his childhood and gave up after 2 facts. He loved boats young, and he fought at the drop of a hat. He sold Eurekas to oil prospectors and to fur trappers. This being Louisiana under Prohibition, he also sold them to the men who ran bootleg liquor through the marshes at night, and then, with no apparent discomfort, to the Coast Guard officers chasing those same men. The thing that let the Eureka disappear into a swamp let it run down anything that tried the same trick. He was not an easy man, and he did not try to be. He swore at everyone, drank whiskey through the workday, brawled when the mood took him, and stood well outside the polite society of New Orleans, which wanted nothing to do with him, and got the same in return. For a while, none of it added up to much. The Depression nearly finished him. The lumber trade collapsed, the orders never came, and by the middle of the decade he was close to broke. He was saved by the one customer with a problem nobody else had solved. The United States Marine Corps wanted a way to put men onto a hostile beach, and for 20 years it had not had one. The Navy's own bureau kept handing the Corps landing boats that did not work. When the services tested Higgins's Eureka against the Navy design in 1938, the swamp craft beat it outright, and beat it again in a full fleet exercise the next February. The Marine General Holland Smith, a man not given to praise, watched the Eureka work and called it an answer to the Marine prayer. Stretched to 36 feet and stamped with a string of Navy initials, it could ride a swell, slam onto sand, unload, and drag itself back off again. It did everything the generals asked. It had one flaw, and the flaw killed people. To leave the boat, men had to climb over its high wooden sides, one at a time, slow and upright and exposed, while whoever held the beach shot at them. A craft that ferried infantry across the water in safety, and then made them clamber out the top into the guns, was half a solution, a coffin with a motor. The answer came from the other side of the world, carried home by a Marine almost nobody believed. In 1937, a young officer named Victor Krulak stood on a riverbank near Shanghai, watching the Japanese army land against the Chinese, and saw the thing the men beside him missed. The Japanese boats had a bow that dropped into a ramp. Their soldiers ran out the front at a flat sprint, low and quick, onto the beach in seconds, instead of climbing over the rails. He photographed the boats through a telephoto lens, wrote up what he had watched, and mailed the report and the pictures to Washington. Someone there read it, decided the writer was a crank, and filed it away. The officer found out years afterward that his work had been stamped in the official wording as coming from some nut out in China. The photograph sat in a drawer in Washington for the better part of 4 years. In April 1941, Krulak finally put the pictures in front of the one man certain to act on them. He carried them to Higgins. Higgins looked at the Japanese ramp, took in the whole idea at a glance, telephoned his engineers in New Orleans and told them to cut the bow off one of his 36-footers and hang a hinged steel ramp there that would drop flat onto the sand. He paid for the prototypes himself. He did not wait for a contract, and he did not wait for the Navy to bless the change. On the 21st of May, in the grey chop of Lake Pontchartrain, the new boat ran onto the shore, dropped its ramp, put men and a light truck on the beach, took them back aboard, and reversed clean into the lake. It worked on the first attempt. It was the act of a man who would rather be right and broke than wrong and comfortable. If you're watching this and finding it interesting, it would mean a lot if you hit subscribe. We make content like this every week, and your support helps us keep going. What he had built had a proper name, the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, though to the men who rode it, it was always the Higgins boat. 36 feet long, a shade under 11 wide, one grey marine diesel of 225 horsepower amidships, plywood sides and stern, a frame of oak and pine and mahogany, a steel ramp at the bow, a few thin plates of armour bolted to the wood. It carried a platoon of 36, or a jeep and a dozen riflemen, or 4 tons of cargo, ran them onto the sand and was gone again in under 4 minutes. Its bottom was shaped so it could run in as little as 10 inches of water and drag itself off the beach again, the same trick the swamp boat had been built for. Men boarded it by climbing down a cargo net from the side of the transport into a hull that pitched and rolled in any kind of sea, so that a fair number of them were sick before they ever saw the beach. It cost almost nothing, and it spared steel for the ships that had to have it. He worked at a speed that unnerved the people who hired him. When the Navy came to New Orleans to look at the ramp boats, they also wanted to talk about a craft big enough to land a tank, and they expected a meeting and a drawing. Higgins told them he would not have a plan, he would have a boat, and to be back in 3 days. They told him it could not be done. The hell it can't, he said, and built the thing in 61 hours. The boats went everywhere the war did. They put troops ashore in North Africa and Sicily, up the beaches of Italy and Normandy and southern France, across 100 islands in the Pacific, and in March 1945 they carried American soldiers across the Rhine into Germany itself. The LCVP was the most numerous of his designs, though far from the sole one. The same yards turned out the bigger landing craft that could set a tank down on a beach, fast wooden PT boats, even a 27-foot lifeboat built to be dropped to downed airmen from a plane. And the Navy Bureau still did not want the boat. It had its own designs, its own favoured yards along the East Coast, and a settled conviction that anything invented outside its walls was beneath notice. There were reasons behind the resistance, and 1 or 2 of them were sound, because a war is no time to stake the invasion of a continent on a man who runs his factory by shouting at it. Higgins did not argue like a contractor. He argued like a man in a baroom. He testified before Congress, attacked the admirals in the press, and forced the whole quarrel into the open where it could not be buried, loud and abrasive and frequently insufferable about all of it. A more agreeable contractor would have deferred to the Navy and let the idea die in a drawer, and the boats that carried the army onto the beaches would have come, if they came at all, from someone slower. He filed the patent for the ramp boat on the 8th of December 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor. After that, the orders came in faster than he could fill them. 75 men had worked for him in 1939. By 1943, there were 20,000, and he had run out of city to put them in. His yards ran day and night, turning out hulls at a pace the old Eastern builders could not touch, and at the peak of the war, the great majority of every vessel in the United States Navy, counted by hull, had come out of Higgins Industries. Nobody had built boats this way before. The established yards still put hulls together one at a time, the way it had always been done. Higgins ran a moving line for them, the way Detroit ran one for cars, and by 1943 his company was doing more than $120 million of business a year. By a method a former advisor to Roosevelt wrote, had broken every precedent in the trade. He ran the place like nothing else in the wartime South. His was the first integrated workforce in New Orleans, black and white, women, the old, the disabled, all on the same lines and all paid the same rate for the same job, in a city in a decade where that came close to scandal. In 1941 he had gone to a civil rights conference in Nashville that respectable Southern businessmen would not touch, and spoke there on the rights of black Americans, which did nothing for his standing with the people who already disliked him. He strung loudspeakers over the factory floor and gave speeches whenever the mood took him, and when he wanted a record broken, he sent in a band to play the national anthem and a speaker to work the crowd until, by his own account to a Senate committee, the tears were running down their faces. Then he told them what he needed, and they did it. There was one piece of foresight in all of it that almost nobody knew. Back in 1939, before a single war contract, Higgins had bought the whole Philippine mahogany crop for the year and stacked it in his yard on a hunch that the wood would be impossible to get when the time came, and he was right. For all that, the boat stayed what it had always been, a wooden box. The plywood that made it cheap and light and quick to build made it close to useless against anything aimed at the men inside. The most famous photograph of the whole European war, the one called Into the Jaws of Death, was taken by a Coast Guard man named Robert Sargent on the morning of the 6th of June, shot forward over the lowered ramp of a Higgins boat as the soldiers of Company E, 16th Infantry, stepped out of it into the water and the fire at Omaha Beach. Some of the men in that picture never reached the sand. What the ramp changed was not one landing, but the shape of the whole war at sea. Before it, taking a defended coast meant battering into a fortified harbour, the only place big enough to put an army ashore. The new boat could land a division on any open stretch of sand it chose, which made the enemy's fortress ports beside the point. A Marine colonel who studied the campaigns put it without ornament. The Higgins boats broke the gridlock on the ship-to-shore movement. How many he built is itself a question without a clean answer. The usual figure is 20,000, but it runs past 23,000 once every hull and every licensee is counted, and below that if the count is held to the LCVP alone. He made so many of the things that no one was ever quite sure of the total. The other side knew his name. Told about the American drowning the oceans in landing craft, Adolf Hitler called him the new Noah. The praise from his own side came later, and from higher up. Eisenhower's aide noted the general grumbling in March 1943 that his coffin ought to be built in the shape of a landing craft, since the shortage of them was practically killing him with worry. By the next spring there were enough, and the invasion went in on the boats from New Orleans. 2 decades on, talking to the historian Stephen Ambrose, Eisenhower said it without a hedge. Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us, and without those LCVPs, the whole strategy of the war would have been different. Being right did not save him. The war that built Higgins Industries into the largest boatyard in the country ended. The contracts ended with it, and the vast machine he had assembled had almost nothing to do once the shooting stopped. He fought the decline the way he fought everything else, and it did not answer to fighting. He died in 1952, 65 years old, his health spent. The company that had carried the American army onto the beaches of 2 oceans shut its doors in 1959 and was gone. There is a street named for him in New Orleans now, running past the War Museum, and most of the people driving down it could not say who he was or what his boats were made of.